The crack of a glass hitting the floor was the first sound anyone registered. Then came the laughter. Cold, ugly, the kind that had nothing funny in it at all. Emily James was already on her knees picking up the pieces, her hands shaking, a thin line of blood running from her lip where her face had caught the edge of the table on the way down. Rick Howell stood over her sneering, and not a single soul in that diner moved a muscle. Not one. 40 feet away in a corner booth, a pair of dark eyes watched everything. And beside those eyes, a dog went very, very still. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story can travel. The Millbrook Diner had been standing on the corner of Route 9 and Cedar Lane for 31 years. It smelled like coffee and burnt toast and something that might have been maple syrup, and it had the kind of lighting that made everyone look slightly tired, which for most of the people who ate there was accurate. Emily James had been working that diner for 6 years. She knew every crack in the linoleum, every wobble in the third stool from the left, every regular who took their eggs scrambled, and their coffee black, and their conversation minimal. She knew which booths had bad springs. She knew the reach-in cooler in the back made a sound like a sick cat every time the compressor kicked on. She knew this place the way you only know somewhere when you've given it more hours than you've given yourself sleep. She was 28 years old, and she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with her shift. That particular Tuesday morning had started the way most of them did. She was on at 5:30, double shifting again because Carla had called out with her back, and because Emily needed the money. Her mother's medications had gone up again, the third increase in 14 months, and the math at the end of every week was the kind that kept Emily staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, adding and subtracting numbers that never came out the way she needed them to. She poured coffee. She took orders. She smiled at Dale Hutchins when he sat down in his usual spot at the counter and asked her how her mama was doing, and she said, "She's hanging in there, Dale, thank you," because that was true enough and easier than the full version. By 9 o'clock, the breakfast rush had thinned. A handful of tables still had people. An older couple near the window. 2 contractors in work boots splitting a plate of pancakes. A man she didn't recognize in the corner booth, sitting very still with a dog at his feet, both of them quiet in a way that felt purposeful rather than passive. She'd noticed him when he came in about 20 minutes earlier. Hard not to. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with short dark brown hair and the kind of posture that didn't come from yoga classes. He was wearing a military uniform, the green and brown digital pattern of Navy working uniform, and he moved through the diner the way people move when they're always accounting for the room. Measured, unhurried. He'd chosen the corner booth without hesitating, sat with his back to the wall, and ordered black coffee and whatever the daily special was without looking at the menu. The dog was a German Shepherd, big with a thick coat of golden brown and black, lying under the table with his head on his paws. Not sleeping. Watching. Emily had asked if she should bring a bowl of water, and the man had said, "That'd be real kind, thank you," in a voice so even it almost sounded like a recording. She'd brought the water. The dog had ignored it. She'd thought, that's a man who has seen worse than a diner on a Tuesday morning. She had no idea how right she was, about to be proven. The bell above the door rang at 9:14. Emily was refilling Dale's coffee when she heard it, and she looked up automatically, the reflex of 6 years. 2 men. She didn't know their names yet. She'd learned them later from the police report. Rick Howell and Gary Pruitt. Both of them from 2 towns over, both of them already carrying that particular looseness in the joints that said the morning hadn't started with coffee. They were loud coming in. Not yelling, not yet, but loud in the way that announces itself like a radio turned up just past comfortable. Rick was bigger, heavy-set, wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up to show forearms that had a lot of tattoos and not a lot of care taken with them. Gary was wiry and restless, the kind of man who can't stand still, who touches everything within reach just to have something to do with his hands. They took a table near the middle of the diner, not the closest empty one to the door. The middle one, the one that put everyone in their line of sight. Emily set Dale's coffee down, picked up her order pad, and walked over. "Morning," she said. "What can I get you to?" Rick looked at her the way some men look at things they've decided don't have feelings. It was a slow look top to bottom, and it lasted just a beat too long. "What's good here, sweetheart?" "Everything on the menu," she said, keeping her voice even. "Daily special is biscuits and gravy. Coffee's fresh." "We want whiskey," Gary said, and then laughed at his own joke. "We don't serve alcohol," Emily said. "You sure about that?" Rick leaned back in his chair. "Check again." "I'm sure. Coffee, juice, soda water. That's what we've got." Rick looked at Gary. Gary looked at Rick. Something passed between them that Emily recognized immediately, that silent agreement that sometimes forms between people when they've decided to make something out of nothing. "Fine," Rick said. "Coffee, and 2 specials. And don't be slow about it." She wrote it down. She didn't say anything else. She went to the counter and called the order back to Lou in the kitchen and poured 2 coffees and carried them back without spilling a drop. That was when Rick reached out and grabbed her wrist. Not hard enough to hurt. Just hard enough to stop her. Just hard enough to make the point. "You got a name," he said. "Emily." She kept her voice flat. She did not pull away. She had learned a long time ago that pulling away sometimes made it worse. "Emily." He said it like he was testing how it tasted. "That's a real pretty name for a real pretty girl working a real depressing job. Thank you for the coffee order," she said. "I'll have your food right out." He let go. She walked back to the counter without hurrying and without looking at the corner booth. But in her peripheral vision, she registered that the man in the military uniform had gone very still, and so had his dog. The food came up 8 minutes later. Emily loaded the plates and carried them over, and she set Rick's plate down in front of him, and he looked at it the way you'd look at something you found on the bottom of your shoe. "This isn't what I ordered." "Biscuits and gravy daily special," she said. "I said I wanted it with eggs." "You didn't mention eggs." "I'm mentioning them now." She picked up the plate. She carried it back to the window. She told Lou to add 2 eggs fried. Lou gave her a look that said he knew exactly what was happening at that table, and he was sorry about it. She said it was fine. He added the eggs. She carried the plate back. Rick looked at it again, with the same expression. "These eggs are wrong." Emily set the plate down very carefully on the table. "How would you like them instead? Not like this. I need something more specific than that." "Then get smarter." The diner had gone quiet. Not completely, not obviously, but the conversations had dropped a register, and the silverware had slowed. People were noticing. People were watching. And people were doing what people almost always do in moments like that, which is nothing. Gary laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. Emily reached for the plate. That was when Rick shoved it. Not at her. He shoved the whole plate off the edge of the table, and the reflex of 6 years of waitressing put Emily's hands out to catch it, and she almost did. But her hip caught the table as she lurched forward, and the plate went sideways, and hot gravy hit her forearm, and the plate cracked against the floor, and she stumbled into the table behind her, and the water glasses on that table went over, and she went with them. The crash was enormous in the quiet of the diner. She hit the floor on her hands and one knee, and her chin clipped the edge of a chair on the way down, and she tasted blood. For a moment, she just stayed there. The linoleum was cold. There was broken glass somewhere near her left hand. The diner was absolutely silent. Then Rick Howell laughed. "That's what happens when you don't listen," he said. Emily's hands were flat on the floor. She could feel the blood on her lip. She could feel the heat on her forearm where the gravy had caught her. She could feel 30 people in that diner looking at her, and not moving, not saying a word, and she understood right then that not a single one of them was going to do anything. She started to push herself up, and then she heard a sound she hadn't heard before in that diner in 6 years, a low sound. From this corner. Not loud, not aggressive, just unmistakable. The German Shepherd had lifted his head off his paws. His eyes were on Rick Howell. His lips had drawn back just enough to show the front of his teeth. And the growl coming out of him was so steady and controlled, it didn't sound like an animal at all. It sounded like a warning issued by something that knew exactly what it was capable of and was choosing for the moment to hold back. Rick heard it. His laugh stopped. In the corner booth, the man in the Navy working uniform stood up. He didn't scrape his chair. He didn't make any sound at all. He just rose from the bench with a kind of quiet deliberateness that was more unnerving than any noise could have been, and he looked at Rick Howell across the length of the diner. And Rick Howell, for the first time since he'd walked through that door, went very still. "Sir," Carter Dean said, his voice carrying without being raised. "I'm going to need you to step back." Rick's jaw worked. He was calculating something. He was looking at the uniform, at the dog, at the expression on Carter's face, and he was doing the math that men like him always do in moments like this, measuring whether the thing they're looking at is really as serious as it appears. He decided it wasn't. "Mind your business, soldier boy," Rick said. Carter Dean put one hand on the back of the bench. He leaned slightly forward. His voice didn't change. "That's what I'm doing," he said. Emily, still on the floor, looked up at him. And for just a moment, in the middle of everything, she felt something shift inside her chest. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The sensation of not being completely alone. Gary pushed his chair back from the table. Rick squared his shoulders. The diner held its breath. Axel's growl deepened by exactly one note. Carter Dean stepped out of the corner booth. Carter Dean walked like a man who had crossed worse ground than a diner floor on a Tuesday morning. No rush, no theater. Just forward one deliberate step at a time, and the space between him and Rick Howell shrank in a way that made everyone in that room unconsciously lean back. Emily was still on the floor. She hadn't moved. Not because she couldn't, but because something in the quality of the air had changed so completely in the last 4 seconds that her body hadn't caught up with it yet. She watched Carter move, and she thought, without quite meaning to, that she had never in her life seen anyone take up exactly the right amount of space before. Not too much, not too little. Exactly what the moment required. Rick held his ground. That was the thing about men like Rick. They always held their ground. Pride was the only thing they owned outright, and they would burn everything around them before they let someone take it. "I said mind your business," Rick repeated louder this time, because an audience had a way of making men like him louder. He was performing now. He glanced around the diner, checking that people were watching, making sure they understood that he wasn't backing down for anybody. "This doesn't concern you." "She's on the floor," Carter said. "That concerns me." "She fell. It was an accident." "It wasn't." The word landed flat and clean and left no room for argument. Not angry, not accusatory. Just the truth stated plainly by someone who had seen enough of the world to know exactly what an accident looked like and exactly what this was. Rick's face changed. The performance slipped for just a moment, and underneath it was something raw. Something that recognized on some animal level that it was being seen clearly. Men like Rick hated being seen clearly more than they hated anything else. "You got a problem, pal." "Not yet," Carter said. He stopped about 6 feet from the table, close enough to make his presence impossible to ignore, far enough to give Rick the option to make the right choice. Carter had learned a long time ago that you always gave people the option first. Not because they usually took it, but because the ones who didn't had no one to blame but themselves for what came next. Behind him, Axel had come out from under the table and was standing in the aisle. Not moving, not pulling toward anyone, just standing there with that terrible patient stillness that working dogs had, the kind of stillness that said, "I am not a threat until I am everything you're afraid of." Gary, the wiry one, scraped his chair back another inch. His eyes kept going to the dog. "Gary," Rick said, not looking at him. "Sit down." Gary sat down, but he didn't look comfortable about it. Lou had appeared at the kitchen window. Emily could see him from the floor, his big hands gripping the edge of the serving counter, his face tight. He was watching. He wasn't coming out because Lou was 53 and had a bad hip and 4 grandchildren, and she would not have wanted him to come out even if he could have. Emily put her palm flat on the floor and pushed herself up. Her knee was scraped. Her forearm was still burning where the gravy had caught it. Her lip had swollen enough that she could feel it without touching it. She straightened up and stood there between the table and the counter and felt every pair of eyes in the room on her, and she made herself stand straight. "I'm fine," she said to no one in particular, and everyone at once. "No, you're not," Carter said without looking at her. He was still watching Rick. It was such a simple, direct thing to say. She didn't know why it hit her so hard. Rick pointed a finger at Carter. "Last warning, man. Walk back to your booth, drink your coffee, and leave this alone. This is between us and the lady." "There is no between," Carter said. "You put her on the floor. That's where it ends." "That right." Rick pushed his chair back and stood up. He was a big man, broad through the chest and shoulders, with that particular kind of mass that came from physical work rather than a gym. He was taller than Carter by maybe 2 inches and outweighed him by 40 pounds. He drew himself up and let Carter see all of that, the full weight of him, the way men do when they're betting their size will settle the argument before it becomes anything more. Carter didn't blink. "Sit back down," Carter said. quieter this time, which made it worse. The diner was so silent that Emily could hear the reach-in cooler in the back making its sick cat sound. She could hear Dale Hutchins breathing through his nose at the counter. She could hear the tick of the clock above the register. And then Gary stood up. He came around the side of the table, fast moving toward Carter's blind side, and everything that happened next happened in the span of about 4 seconds, which is longer than it sounds, but shorter than anyone in that room was prepared for. Carter's body turned before Gary had taken 2 steps. Not a spin, not a lurch. A clean, economical pivot the way a compass needle swings to north. His right hand came up and caught Gary's outstretched arm at the wrist, and he used Gary's own forward momentum to redirect him, stepping aside and guiding him into the side of the neighboring table with a controlled, precise force that was more physics than violence. Gary hit the table edge with his hip and went down, hard breath going out of him in a grunt. Rick charged. He threw a punch that had his full weight behind it, a haymaker aimed at the side of Carter's head, and it would have ended the argument decisively if it had landed. It didn't land. Carter slipped inside the arc of it, absorbed Rick's forward momentum against his shoulder, got his hip under Rick's center of gravity, and put him on the floor in one smooth, unhurried movement that made it look like Rick had simply decided to lie down. Rick hit the linoleum back first. The sound was enormous. He lay there for a moment, the breath knocked out of him, staring up at the ceiling tiles with an expression of pure, uncomprehending shock. Carter stood over him. Not looming, not performing, just standing. "Stay down," he said. A woman at the table near the window had her hand over her mouth. Dale Hutchins had half risen from his stool. The 2 contractors had pushed their plates aside and were staring. Gary tried to get up from the floor. He made it to his hands and knees, and that was when he heard Axel. The German Shepherd had moved to within 4 feet of him while no one was watching the dog. He was standing completely still, his golden brown and black coat smooth and flat, his amber eyes fixed on Gary with an attention so total and unbroken it was like being looked at by something that had decided you were the only object in the universe. The growl was gone now. What replaced it was worse. Pure quiet. Gary looked into those eyes and seemed to understand very clearly that the dog was not performing either. He put his hands back on the floor and stayed exactly where he was. Rick was already trying to push himself up. He got onto one elbow, his face flushed deep red, his mouth working. "You're dead," he said. "You hear me? You're dead. You know who I know. You know who my brother-in-law is. He's a city councilman. You just assaulted me in front of 30 people. I'm going to have your career, your pension, everything. I'm going to make sure you never work another day. Someone want to call 911? Carter said, addressing the room without raising his voice. 3 people reached for their phones at the same time. Emily realized she was shaking. Not from fear exactly. It was more like her body had been running on adrenaline for the last 10 minutes, and now that the immediate crisis was over, the engine was stuttering. She wrapped her arms around herself and stood there and watched Carter Dean crouch down to Rick Howell's level, his elbows on his knees, completely relaxed, like a man waiting for a bus. "You're going to want to be quiet now," Carter told Rick in the same even, unhurried voice he'd used for everything else. "The things you're saying right now, the people in this room are going to repeat them to the police when they get here. So you want to think about that." Rick stared at him. Something in his expression was shifting. The bluster was losing ground to something else. Something that men like Rick only encountered, rarely the specific terror of a situation that had gotten completely out of their control and shows no sign of getting back into it. "Who are you?" Rick said. And this time, it wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question. Carter didn't answer it. He stood back up and turned to Emily. She was struck again by his face. It wasn't a hard face exactly, but it was a settled one. The face of someone who had made peace with difficult things and carried them without making everyone around him aware of the weight. "You need to sit down," he said. "I'm okay." "You're not okay. You're running on shock right now, and in about 5 minutes your knee's going to remind you what happened." He looked at the scrape on her forearm. "That needs to be cleaned." "I've had worse," she said. "I know," he said. "That doesn't mean you sit on it." She almost laughed. It surprised her so much that she actually covered her mouth with her hand, and then the almost laugh became something else. Something that pressed behind her eyes and made her throat tight, and she had to look away to keep it from turning into the kind of crying she could not do in front of 30 people. "Hey," Carter said quietly, not touching her, just close enough that his voice was for her and not the room. "You held it together. That's not nothing. That's a lot, actually. She nodded because words weren't available right then. From the floor, Gary Pruitt was slowly, cautiously raising one hand. Can you call the dog off? Carter glanced at Axel. Axel glanced at Carter. Some communication passed between them that required no sound. He's not on you, Carter said. He's looking at me. He's watching you. There's a difference. Don't give him a reason to close that gap and you'll be fine. Gary put his hand back down on the floor. The door of the diner opened. Everyone looked up. An older man in a postal uniform, midway through what appeared to be his regular Tuesday coffee stop, took one step inside, registered the two men on the floor, the German Shepherd, the military uniform, the broken glass, and the blood on the waitress's lip. He took one step back out. The door swung shut. Somebody at the back table actually laughed. A short, nervous sound that broke the tension just enough that the room breathed again. Rick was sitting up now, his back against the table leg, his dignity somewhere on the floor around him. He was pressing the heel of his hand against the back of his head, where it had hit the linoleum, and the rage on his face had cooled into something harder and flatter. He was thinking now. That was almost more dangerous than when he'd been acting on impulse. "You're going to regret this," he said. Not to the room this time. Directly to Carter. Quietly. Carter looked at him for a moment. "I've regretted things before," he said. "This isn't going to be one of them." Sirens started up somewhere in the distance, thin and far away at first, then gaining quickly. Emily heard them and felt her shoulders drop about 2 inches. She hadn't realized how far up they'd been. She looked at Carter standing there in the middle of the wreckage of her Tuesday morning, and she thought about how she had spent 6 years learning every broken thing about this diner and had never not once expected it to contain a moment like this one. "What's your dog's name?" she asked. Carter looked at her. Something in his expression shifted slightly. Not much. Just enough. "Axel," he said. She looked at the German Shepherd. Axel's amber eyes moved to her, calm and direct, and utterly without agenda. "Hi, Axel," she said. The dog's tail moved once. Just once. Then he went back to watching Gary Pruitt. The sirens got louder. Rick Howell heard them, and his jaw tightened, and for the first time, he looked less like a man who was angry, and more like a man who was calculating exactly how bad the next hour was about to be. Carter heard them too. He looked toward the door. His expression didn't change, but he reached down without looking and put his hand briefly on the top of Axel's head. The dog leaned into it for just a second, and then both of them straightened back up, and they stood together and waited. The first officer through the door was young, maybe 25, with the kind of face that still looked surprised by things. He took in the room in one sweep hand, moving toward his belt, and then he saw Carter's uniform, and his hand stopped. "Sir," he said uncertainly. "Officer," Carter said. "2 individuals, both on the floor, both ambulatory. No weapons involved. The woman behind the counter was assaulted prior to my intervention. There are approximately 30 witnesses." The young officer blinked. He looked at Rick. He looked at Gary. He looked at Axel. "Is that dog secure?" "He's a military working dog, and he is completely under control," Carter said. "He will not move unless I give him a command, or unless one of those 2 men makes a decision they will immediately regret." Gary, still on the floor, made a very deliberate point of putting both his palms flat on the linoleum and not moving at all. A second officer came in behind the first, older, heavier, with sergeant's stripes and the unhurried energy of someone who had seen most things. She looked at the room with the same sweep her partner had used, but where his had been reactive, hers was analytical. Her eyes moved from Rick to Gary, to Carter, to Emily, and they paused on Emily the longest. "Who called this in?" she asked. 3 people raised their hands. "Okay." She pulled out a notepad. "I'm Sergeant Rachel Grant. Everybody who saw what happened, I need you to stay where you are. We're going to take statements." She looked at Rick, who had made it to his feet, and was standing with one hand on the table, his hair disheveled, the back of his shirt twisted. "Sir, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them, and not move from that spot." "That man attacked me," Rick said, immediately pointing at Carter. "Unprovoked, in front of everyone here. I want him arrested." The room made a sound. Not words, just a collective exhale of disbelief that communicated itself clearly enough without them. Sergeant Grant looked at Rick without any particular expression. "I'll hear from everyone," she said. "You'll get your turn." I don't want to turn. I want him in handcuffs. Sir? Her voice did not rise. It did something more effective than rising. It flattened like a road that stretches straight to the horizon and doesn't intend to turn. If you speak again before I address you, I will consider that a complication. Do you understand what I mean by that? Rick closed his mouth. Emily watched from behind the counter, where Lou had appeared from the kitchen, and put a clean dish towel against her forearm without being asked. The burn wasn't bad. It would blister maybe, but nothing serious. Her lip had stopped bleeding. She was holding the dish towel against her arm and watching Sergeant Grant work the room and feeling a very specific kind of exhausted that she associated with the moment after something frightening finally stops. Grant turned to Carter. Can I get your name and unit? Carter Dean, Petty Officer, First Class Navy SEAL, currently on authorized leave. He reached into his breast pocket and produced his military ID with 2 fingers holding it out flat. I can provide my commanding officer's contact information if you need verification. Grant took the ID, looked at it, handed it back. What happened? Carter told her. He was concise and specific, and he didn't editorialize. He laid out the sequence of events the way you'd read coordinates off a map. He described where he was seated, what he observed the moment Emily was shoved his approach. Rick's refusal to comply, Gary's attempt to flank him, and his response to both. He used no language that was inflammatory, and no language that minimized. He simply described what had occurred in order with the kind of clarity that comes from being trained to report accurately under conditions considerably more stressful than a Tuesday morning in a diner. When he finished, Grant looked at him for a moment. Were you in fear for the safety of the victim? She was on the floor with a cut on her face, Carter said. Yes. Grant wrote something down. She turned to the room. Who else saw the initial contact? When the woman was pushed. 12 hands went up. Rick made a sound in his throat. It wasn't a word. It was more like the sound a man makes when he realizes the ground has shifted beneath him, and the shift is permanent. Grant looked at him. Then she looked at her young partner. Something passed between them that required no words. The young officer walked to Rick and said, Sir, I need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back. Rick went rigid. You're arresting me. Are you serious right now? He put me on the floor. He put me on the actual floor in front of... Sir, turn around. I have a brother-in-law on the city council. His name is Dennis Fry. You call him right now and ask him who I am, and then you come back here and you tell me if you still want to put those cuffs on. The young officer paused, and that was when Dale Hutchins, who had been sitting at the counter through all of it without saying a word, who was 61 years old, and had been coming to this diner every Tuesday morning for 9 years, who had known Emily since she was 22, and had watched her work doubles without complaining, and talk about her mother's medication costs, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, pushed himself off his stool and said, Son, I'm a retired circuit court judge, and I watched that man put this young woman on the floor and laugh about it. You put those cuffs on him. You put them on right now. The room was dead silent. The young officer looked at Dale. He looked at Rick. He reached for his cuffs. Rick's face went through 5 different things in about 2 seconds. Rage, calculation, disbelief, something that might have been the beginning of actual fear, and then the rigid, locked-down expression of a man who has decided to stop talking because talking is only making it worse. He turned around. He put his hands back. The cuffs went on with a sound that was somehow more final than anything else that had happened in the last 40 minutes. Gary didn't wait to be asked. He was already on his feet, hands out in front of him, looking at the young officer with an expression of absolute cooperation. I'll go quiet, he said. I swear, just keep the dog away from me. Carter looked at Axel. Fuss, he said quietly. Axel walked to Carter's left side and sat down. His eyes were still on Gary, but he sat. Gary breathed out like a man stepping off a ledge onto solid ground. It was while Grant was taking Dale's statement that Emily slipped out from behind the counter. She needed air. Not outside, not really, just away from the middle of it for a moment. Away from the police radios and the voices and the weight of 30 people who had watched everything happen and were now eager to describe it to each other in the particular energized way that witnesses have when the danger is over and the story begins. She went to the far end of the counter and sat on the stool at the corner, the one with the bad spin that always went 3/4 of the way around before it caught. She put her elbows on the counter. She pressed the cool dish towel against her forearm, and she stared at the coffee maker, and she breathed. She was still sitting like that when she heard boots on the linoleum and knew without looking who it was. Carter Dean sat down on the stool next to hers. He set his forearms on the counter, and he looked at the same coffee maker she was looking at. "They're going to need a statement from you," he said. "I know. Whenever you're ready." "I know." She turned the dish towel over. The other side was cooler. "How long have you been a SEAL?" 8 years. "You deploy a lot." "Enough." "You always eat at diners when you're on leave." "Usually, yeah." A pause. "Fewer questions than home." She looked at him sideways. That was a joke. Something like that. She almost smiled. Her lip made it complicated. "Where's home?" "Virginia Beach, mostly. My sister's in Dalton, about 40 miles from here. I was headed there." He glanced at her arm. "How bad is it?" "It's not bad." "Let me see." She lowered the towel. He looked at the burn with the same direct, unsentimental attention he'd given everything else. "You need someone to look at that properly," he said. "Paramedics are outside." "I'm not going to the hospital over a graze from hot gravy." "I didn't say hospital. I said paramedics." She looked at him. He looked back. She decided not to argue about it. "What about your dog?" she said. "Axel's fine. He's working." "Is he always like that? That calm?" Carter thought about it for a moment, and it seemed like a genuine consideration rather than a reflexive answer. "He knows the difference between a threat and a noise. Most situations are noise. He waits for the actual threat." "How does he know?" "I don't entirely know," Carter said. "I've stopped trying to figure it out. He just does." Emily watched Axel from across the room. He was sitting beside Carter's vacated booth, watching Grant's partner interview one of the contractors, his amber eyes patient and absolute. "He looked at me," she said. "When I was on the floor, before you stood up, he looked right at me." Carter was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "He does that sometimes." It wasn't an explanation, but it felt like one. Grant appeared at Emily's shoulder. "Miss James, when you're ready, I'd like to take your account of what happened." Emily straightened up from the counter. She folded the dish towel once neatly and set it down. She stood up, and her knee reminded her exactly what Carter had told her it would, a hot, specific ache that shot up the side of her leg and made her breath catch. Carter stood up at the same time. He didn't touch her. He just stood in a way that meant he was there if she needed the steadiness. She didn't use it, but she noticed it. "I'm ready," she told Grant. She told her story to Sergeant Grant in a clear, flat voice that surprised her a little. She expected it to feel worse saying it out loud, but it turned out that having someone write your words down with attention and gravity and without skepticism made it feel less like a wound and more like evidence. Which it was. Which it always should have been. When she described being shoved, Grant's pen paused for exactly 1 second on the paper. Then it kept moving. When she finished, Grant said, "Is there anything you want to add that I haven't asked you about?" Emily thought about it. "The man at the counter," she said. "Dale. He's the one who stood up when it mattered." Grant glanced at her notepad. "Dale Hutchins, retired judge." "He's not a judge here," Emily said. "Here he's just a regular. He comes every Tuesday. He always sits at the counter. He always orders the same thing." She paused. "He's the one who stood up." Grant wrote it down. Outside through the diner windows, Emily could see a second patrol car had arrived, and a paramedic unit was pulling up alongside it. A small cluster of people had formed on the sidewalk, the particular magnetism of a scene that would be talked about at dinner tables across town by nightfall. Rick Howell was visible through the glass, sitting in the back of the first patrol car. From this distance, his face was unreadable. His head was back against the seat, and he was staring at the roof of the car in the way men stare when they are doing a very urgent accounting of their life choices. Gary was in the second car. He had his hands in his lap, and he was looking at the floor. Emily watched them through the glass and felt something complicated settle in her chest. Not satisfaction exactly. Not relief exactly. Something that didn't have a clean name. The feeling of having been treated as if what happened to you mattered. The feeling of having been seen by someone who had every reason to keep looking the other way and chose not to. She turned away from the window. Carter was at the far end of the counter. Axel back at his feet, talking to Grant's partner, his voice low and even. He looked up once while he was talking and met Emily's eyes across the room, and he gave a single small nod. Not reassurance. Something more like acknowledgement. Like, yes, this happened. Yes, it was real. Yes, it's going to be okay. She nodded back. Dale Hutchins put a hand briefly on her shoulder as he walked past on his way back to his stool. He didn't say anything. He sat back down, picked up his coffee cup, and found it empty. He set it down again and folded his hands around it anyway. Emily picked up the coffee pot. She walked to the counter. She refilled his cup. He looked up at her, and there was something in his face that was not pity and not admiration, but something older and quieter than both. The look of someone who had seen enough of the world to know that what had happened here today was not a small thing, and that the woman pouring his coffee had handled it with more dignity than most people could have managed. "Thank you, Emily," Dale said. "Thank you, Dale," she said. She put the coffee pot back. Across the room, Rick Howell's seat at the table sat empty, the remnants of a meal. Nobody finished a shattered plate, 2 overturned glasses, and a chair still pushed at the wrong angle. The physical evidence of what had happened before anyone in that room had found the will to act. Anyone except a man in a Navy uniform and the dog that never looked away. Emily looked at that empty table for a long moment. Then she went and got the mop. The mop had a broken handle that Lou had fixed twice with electrical tape and never replaced, and Emily had always found the repetitive motion of it useful for thinking. She worked the floor around the table where Rick and Gary had sat, and she thought about nothing in particular and everything at once, which was the closest she ever got to peace on a hard day. The diner had thinned out. Most of the witnesses had given their statements and drifted back into their Tuesday mornings, carrying the story with them, the way people carry things they know they'll be telling for years. The contractors had left a $20 tip on a $14 ticket. The older couple near the window had not left at all. They were still sitting there, the woman with her hand over her husband's on the table, and Emily had the feeling they weren't staying for the coffee. Grant had gone outside to coordinate with the second unit. Her young partner was finishing up a last statement near the register. Carter was still at the counter, Axel under the stool at his feet, and he had somehow ended up with a fresh cup of coffee that Emily had no memory of pouring, but must have because nobody else in the building was going to have done it. Lou came out of the kitchen. He stood in the middle of the floor for a moment, looking at the cleaned-up table, the righted chairs, the place where the broken plate had been. He was a big man who had worked a hot kitchen for 22 years and had the forearms and the permanent squint to prove it. He looked at all of it, and his jaw worked once. Then he walked to Emily and took the mop handle out of her hands. "Go sit down," he said. "Lou, I'm fine. Emily." He said her name with the particular weight of someone who is not going to negotiate. "Go sit down." She went and sat down. She chose the stool 2 away from Carter because 1 away felt like something, and 3 away felt like a statement. Grant came back through the door. She had her notepad out again, and she pulled a stool from the end of the counter and sat on it in a way that made it clear she was done with the official portion and starting something else. Something that didn't require the notepad, but she was going to use it anyway, out of habit. "Mr. Dean," she said. "Sergeant. I want to make sure I have the sequence clearly. You intervened after Miss James was pushed, not before." "Correct. You gave verbal commands before any physical contact." 2 separate verbal commands, both of which were refused. "And the physical contact you initiated was in response to the larger individual charging me with a closed fist and the second individual attempting to flank me simultaneously." "Yes." Grant wrote something down. She tapped her pen against the pad once. "You understand that Howell is going to push the assault angle." "I'd be surprised if he didn't. His brother-in-law actually is a city councilman." Carter looked at her steadily. "Is that relevant to what happened in this room this morning?" Grant looked back at him with an expression that had a lot of things in it, and none of them were uncertainty. "No," she said. "It's not." She wrote something else down. "We've got 12 witnesses who corroborate your account in full. We've got 3 cell phone videos that were recording when Howell shoved Miss James, and at least 2 of them captured the subsequent exchange. I've already requested the footage." Emily's head came up. "People were recording it. 3 of them," Grant said, not without a certain dryness in her voice. "Nobody intervened. 3 people took out their phones." The room absorbed that quietly. "The footage actually helps you considerably," Grant said to Carter. Whatever Howell's attorney argues, the video is the video. I'm not concerned about Howell's attorney, Carter said. You should be a little concerned. I'll be a little concerned later. Right now, I'm wondering if anyone's checked on Miss James's arm. They both looked at Emily. Emily looked at her arm. The dish towel was still wrapped around it. She had forgotten about it. The paramedics are still outside, Grant said. I'd like you to let them take a look before they clear the scene. That's not a request. Okay, Emily said. The burn and the cut on your lip both need to be documented for the record as well. Medical documentation of injury strengthens the assault charge. Emily nodded. She understood. She also understood that Grant was doing her a kindness by framing it as procedural rather than as concern, because concern right now might break something loose that Emily needed to stay locked down until she got home. She stood up again. Her knee had stiffened while she was sitting, and she felt it in her face when she put weight on it, but she kept her expression neutral. She was good at that. She had been good at that for a long time. She was halfway to the door when Grant said, "Miss James?" She turned. "You did everything right," Grant said. It was a flat, factual statement, delivered without inflection, and somehow that made it land harder than if it had been warm. In a situation where most people would have frozen or escalated, you stayed controlled, you stayed polite, you didn't give them anything to justify what they did. That matters in how this case goes forward. I want you to know that. Emily held that for a moment. Thank you, she said. Outside, the air was cool and carried the smell of October in a way that hit her differently after the closed, overheated air of the diner. She walked to the paramedic unit and let a young woman with efficient hands and a kind face look at her arm and her lip and write things down on a form. The burn was superficial. The lip had a small laceration that had already clotted. The knee was bruised but not damaged. The paramedic called all of it minor, and Emily agreed, and the paramedic looked at her in a way that suggested she wanted to say more, but was keeping it professional. You can ice the knee tonight, the paramedic said. Elevated, anti-inflammatory if you have it. I have it, Emily said. Take it. Okay. She was walking back toward the diner when she heard Rick Howell's voice. He was in the back of the patrol car close enough to the cracked window that his voice carried. He was on his phone. His handcuffs had apparently been moved to the front to allow it, and he had the phone pressed between his shoulder and his cheek, and he was talking in the rapid, pressurized voice of a man who has realized that consequences are real and is trying very hard to stop them from arriving. Dennis, listen to me, Dennis. I need you to call somebody down here because this is completely out of hand. There was a no listen, I didn't do anything. Some guy in a military uniform decided to make himself a hero, and now I'm sitting in the back of a squad car. And Dennis, if you know anyone on the force here, anyone at all. Emily stopped walking. She stood outside the patrol car, and she looked at Rick Howell through the glass, and she felt something move through her that was not quite anger and not quite satisfaction. It was something cleaner than either of those. It was the feeling of watching someone discover for the first time that the thing they had always used to get out of situations, the name, the connection, the implied threat, was not going to work this time. It was the feeling of watching a lock that had always opened, recognize that the key no longer fit. Rick looked up and saw her. He stopped talking. They looked at each other through the glass. 10 seconds, maybe. Neither of them moved. Then Emily turned and walked back into the diner. Carter was standing at the counter. He had his phone in his hand, and he was reading something on the screen with a look that was not alarmed, but was not neutral either. Everything okay? Emily said. He looked up. He put the phone in his pocket. Yeah, he had said it a fraction of a second too quickly. She noticed it, and she filed it, and she decided not to pursue it, because she was a woman who knew when a person needed to be given the space to carry something on their own. Lou had gotten the coffee going again, and had put a plate of biscuits on the counter that nobody had ordered, but everyone within reach was quietly helping themselves too. Dale Hutchins had a biscuit and his coffee, and he was sitting in his stool with the air of a man who has accomplished something significant and is comfortable letting it be unremarked upon. Emily sat back down on her stool. Carter sat on his. Your sister, Emily said. In Dalton. You should probably still get there. I'm not in a hurry. She's expecting you. She's always expecting me. She's used to adjusted timelines. Emily looked at her hands on the counter. How long are you on leave for? 2 weeks. When did it start? Yesterday. She looked at him. You drove from Virginia Beach yesterday, and you've been here one day, and this happened. Something like that. Do things like this happen to you a lot? He picked up his coffee cup. He turned it in his hands once. Define a lot, he said. She almost smiled again. Her lip let her get a little closer to it this time. You know what I mean. Things happen, he said. I try to respond to them correctly. Whether that happens a lot depends on what's around me. That's a very careful answer. I'm a careful person. You didn't seem that careful when you walked toward two drunk guys who outweighed you. That's different. That's not carefulness. That's training. He set the cup down. Careful means thinking before you act. I did think. It just happened fast. She watched his face while he said it the way the words came out in that same level, unhurried cadence that everything came out of him. And she thought about how her mother used to say that you could tell everything about a person's character by how they behaved when they believed nobody important was watching. Carter Dean had walked across that diner when 30 people were watching, which meant he would have done it when no one was. That was a particular kind of person. She didn't meet many of them. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. Why, Axel, what does it mean? Carter glanced down at the dog who was lying under the stool, now his chin on his paws, his eyes moving between the door and the window in a slow, regular sweep that apparently never stopped. It was his name when he came to me. Military dogs get their names in training. I didn't change it. Did you think about changing it? For about 10 minutes. Then I saw him work for the first time, and I understood the name. What does it mean, Axel? It's Norse. Means father of peace. Emily looked at the dog for a long moment. That's not ironic, she said. It depends on how you define peace, Carter said. Axel's definition is pretty direct. Things are peaceful when threats are handled. He's very committed to the handling. Grant appeared at this counter. She had her jacket on now and her notepad tucked away. We're going to process Howell and Pruitt. Given the witness statements and the video evidence, the DA will almost certainly move on misdemeanor assault at minimum, possibly escalated to felony, depending on how the injury documentation reads. You'll likely be contacted for follow-up. Okay, Emily said. Grant looked at her steadily. Howell made reference to his brother-in-law's position. I want you to understand that has no bearing on how this office handles a documented assault with multiple witnesses and video evidence. If anyone contacts you with regard to that, you call me directly. She set a business card on the counter. My cell number is on the back. Emily picked up the card. Thank you, Sergeant. Grant looked at Carter. Mr. Dean, your contact information is logged. You may receive a follow-up call from the DA's office. Understood. You handled this well, Grant said. It had the same flat factual quality as when she'd said the same thing to Emily. She was clearly a woman who gave credit exactly where it was due, and precisely to the degree it was due, and not one fraction more. I handled it adequately, Carter said. Grant almost smiled. It was a near thing. Have a good leave, she said. She walked out. The young officer followed her. The door swung shut, and for the first time in over 2 hours, the Millbrook diner contained only its own people. The silence that followed was the good kind. The kind that comes after something hard is over, and the space that was full of noise is adjusting back to itself. Lou turned the coffee maker off and turned it back on, which was what he did when he needed to do something with his hands. Dale finished his biscuit and reached for another. The older couple near the window finally got up, and the woman stopped at the counter and put her hand very briefly on Emily's shoulder before she went, and Emily looked up, and the woman had nothing on her face except the understanding of someone who was old enough to have lived through her own version of a day like this one. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Emily's phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out. A text from her mother. Just 3 words. How's your day? Emily looked at the screen for a moment. She thought about the morning. The coffee and the toast smell. Dale at the counter. The bell above the door. The sound of glass on the floor and the cold of the linoleum under her palms. A dog going still in a corner booth. A man standing up when 30 other people didn't. She typed back. Interesting. I'll tell you tonight. How are you feeling? The response came in under a minute. Better. Made soup. Don't be late. Emily put the phone back in her pocket. She breathed once, slow and full. Then she noticed Carter had his phone in his hand, again, same screen, same expression. She had been right earlier when she noticed he'd put it away too quickly. Whatever was on that screen was not going away just because he'd pocketed the phone. "Carter," she said. He looked up. "What's on your phone?" A pause, brief but there. "My commanding officer," he said. "They're contacting you about this. Not about this." He turned the phone face down on the counter. "About something else." She looked at him. He looked at the counter. Axel under the stool had lifted his head. "Your leave," Emily said slowly. 2 weeks. "Yeah." "Is it still 2 weeks?" Carter turned the phone over again. He looked at the screen one more time. Then he set it down and wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at the coffee maker and was very quiet for a long moment. "It was 2 weeks," he said. The coffee maker hummed. Outside, the patrol cars had gone. The sidewalk was empty. The October air pressed against the windows, and the clock above the register ticked, and the reach-in cooler in the back made its sick cat sound. Emily looked at Carter Dean's profile, the set of his jaw, the way his shoulders had shifted almost imperceptibly, carrying something new that hadn't been there when Grant was still in the room. Axel put his head back on his paws. He looked at Emily. Just once. Just for a moment. And somehow, that was the thing that told her everything she needed to know about what was coming next. Emily had learned somewhere in the years of double shifts and late-night arithmetic and mornings that started before the sun had committed to rising that the people who changed your life rarely announced themselves. They didn't come with context or introduction. They came in through ordinary doors on ordinary days, and you only understood what they were afterward, when the moment had already passed, and you were left holding the shape of it. Carter Dean was still looking at his phone. She waited. He set it face down on the counter again. He picked up his coffee. He set it back down without drinking from it. Then he turned to her with an expression that had made its decision and was done deliberating. "They're moving the timeline up," he said. "Deployment. I've got 72 hours. Emily absorbed that. "You said the leave was 2 weeks." It was. "And now it's 72 hours. Now it's 72 hours. He said it the way people say things they have already accepted. Not resigned, not bitter. Just stated clean and level the way you state facts that you have no power to change and have made peace with not having power to change. "Can they do that?" she asked. "Just cancel your leave like that." "They didn't cancel it. They adjusted it." A pause. "There's a difference, technically." "That sounds like a difference that doesn't feel like a difference." Something moved in his face. Brief, barely visible, but there. "Yeah," he said. "It does sound like that." Lou appeared at the kitchen window. He looked at Carter, and then at Emily, and then back at Carter with the expression of a man who has been reading rooms for 22 years and is currently reading this one accurately. "More coffee," he said. "Please," Carter said. Lou filled the cup. He set the pot down and he stood there for a moment. "You got family around here, before you head out." "My sister, in Dalton." "Good." Lou said it like it settled something. "You should get there. Family before the rest of it." Carter looked at him for a moment. "That's the plan." "Good plan," Lou said, and went back to the kitchen. Axel had come out from under the stool and was sitting beside Carter's leg, now upright, his amber eyes moving between Carter's face and the door, in the patient, attentive way he had like a sentry who had never once in his life been caught off guard and was not about to start. Emily watched the dog for a moment. "Does he know?" she said. Carter glanced down at Axel. "Know what? That things are changing, that you're leaving." Carter looked at Axel for a long moment. He knows something shifted. He always does. He reached down and put a hand on the dog's head, the same brief contact she'd seen him make before, and Axel leaned into it and then straightened back up. "He'll be ready. He's always ready." "Are you?" Emily asked. It was a more direct question than she'd intended, and she felt it hanging in the air between them a beat after it left her mouth. But she didn't take it back, because it was real, and he deserved a real question after a morning like this one. Carter turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I'm going to go see my sister first," he said. And then yes. It wasn't the answer to the question she'd asked, and they both knew it, And neither of them said so because some answers are located in what surrounds them rather than in themselves. Dale Hutchins paid his check at the register and came back down the counter on his way to the door. He stopped at Emily's stool. He looked at her with those quiet, worn eyes that had seen enough courtrooms and enough of the particular failures of people to be beyond surprise, but not beyond caring. "You know what I was thinking about while all that was happening," he said. "What? The first time you waited on me. 9 years ago. You'd been here 2 days. You got my order wrong twice, and you apologized so many times I thought you were going to cry. And you didn't cry. You just fixed it." He picked up his hat from the counter. "You always fix it. That's your particular quality, Emily. I thought you should know someone has noticed it." He put on his hat. He nodded once to Carter. He walked out. The bell above the door rang once and was still. Emily sat with that for a moment. She sat with it carefully, the way you handle something that is solid and real and you don't want to drop it. Then her phone buzzed again. She pulled it out. Different number this time, one she didn't recognize. She frowned and answered it. "Miss James. This is Kevin Sartell. I'm a reporter with the Millbrook Courier. We received information regarding an incident at the Millbrook Diner this morning, and I was hoping to ask you a few questions about—" "How did you get this number?" Emily said. "We have a source at—" "No comment," she said. "Thank you." She ended the call. She put the phone on the counter and looked at it. "It's starting," Carter said. "What is the story getting out?" He said it without judgment, just observation. 3 people were recording. It's probably already online. She hadn't thought about that. She had been so inside the experience of the morning that the idea of it existing outside of being seen by people who weren't in this room hadn't fully arrived yet. She picked up her phone. She opened the browser. She typed the name of the diner. The first result was a Twitter post. 47 minutes old. A 14-second video shaky taken from the table at a diagonal angle that caught Rick's shove and Emily going down, and then the pan to Carter standing up. The caption read, "This happened this morning at a diner near me." The Navy SEAL didn't even raise his voice. Nearly 4,000 retweets. She put the phone face down on the counter. 4,000, she said. "By tonight it'll be more," Carter said. He didn't sound pleased or displeased about it. He sounded like a man accounting for a variable. "Does that bother you?" He thought about it genuinely, and she appreciated that he didn't answer immediately. "It's not about me," he said finally. "What happened to you this morning happened to you. If people seeing it changes something for someone else, then that's what it does. That part's out of our hands now." She turned that over. She thought about 30 people sitting in this diner who had watched and hadn't moved, and she thought about 3 of them holding up phones, and she thought about which of those felt worse, and which felt more honest about the nature of people, and she didn't arrive at a clean answer, because there wasn't one. "What was it like?" she said, "walking toward them like that? Were you scared?" "No," he said, "at all. Fear has a function," he said. "It sharpens things that need to be sharp. In that moment, everything was already sharp. Fear would have been redundant. That's not how most people work." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She looked at him. "Do you ever wish you were more like most people?" He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Sometimes I wish the world was built in a way where the things I'm trained to do weren't necessary," he said. "But I don't spend a lot of time there. The world is the way it is. You work with what's in front of you." "That's either very healthy or very sad," Emily said. "Probably some of each," he said. She almost smiled. Her lip had loosened enough that this time it almost made it. Her phone buzzed again. 2 more unknown numbers in quick succession. She turned it over and left it. Carter checked his watch. He looked at Axel. He looked at the door. She could feel the calculation happening behind his eyes, the quiet geometry of a man who is very good at measuring what he owes to what and in what order. "I need to get on the road," he said. "Your sister." "My sister. And then—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. He stood up. He put a hand in his jacket pocket and came out with his wallet and set 2 20s on the counter. "For the coffee and the special." "That's too much," she said. "The tip makes up the difference," he said. "Carter." The bill was $11. "Like I said," he said, and put the wallet back. She stood up too. She wasn't sure why. She had nothing to do standing up that she couldn't do sitting down, but something about him leaving required her to be on her feet for it. Axel was already at his side, the two of them aligned without any visible communication, that perfect practiced unit. "Where are you going?" Emily asked. "After leave, after everything. Do you know?" "I know the general direction," he said. "I don't always know the specific geography until I'm there." "That doesn't scare you?" "No," he said. "The geography is never really the point." She looked at him. All of him. The uniform, and the short dark hair, and the face that had seen things it would never describe, and had made its terms with that, and carried on. The man who had looked at her on the floor in front of 30 people and made the only decision she now realized was ever going to matter. "Thank you," she said. "I said it before, but I mean it differently now than I did before." How so? She thought about it. She thought about Dale's words. "You always fix it." She thought about her mother's soup, and the 3 words of the text and the clock above the register, and the 6 years of this floor and this counter, and this particular quality of exhausted that she had been carrying for so long. It had started to feel like a personality trait. Before, she said, "I was thanking you for what you did. Now I'm thanking you for making me remember that it was worth doing." He looked at her for a moment. "You didn't need me for that," he said. "You were already getting up off the floor before I got there." She held that. She held it like the thing Dale had said carefully in both hands. "Maybe," she said, "but it's different when someone's standing there." He nodded once. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." He looked down at Axel. Something passed between them, and Axel turned to face the door, and Carter looked back at Emily one last time. "Take care of your knee," he said. "Take care of whatever comes next," she said. He walked to the door. He pushed it open. The October air came through for just a second, cool and clear, and carrying the smell of the season turning. Axel walked through first, and then Carter, and the door swung shut behind them, and the bell rang once and was still. Emily stood at the counter and watched through the window as the two of them moved through the parking lot. The man and the dog, both of them straight and unhurried, and absolutely certain of their direction. Carter opened the passenger side door, and Axel went in with the practiced ease of an animal that has done this 10,000 times. Carter walked around and got behind the wheel. The truck started. It pulled out of the lot. It turned onto Route 9 heading west and became smaller, and then was gone. Lou came out of the kitchen. He stood beside her and looked out the window at the empty lot. "You all right?" he said. She thought about the question honestly, the way it deserved to be thought about. Her arm was burned. Her knee ached. Her lip was split. Her phone was buzzing with calls from strangers who had watched 14 seconds of the worst part of her morning and decided it meant they knew something about her. Rick Howell was in a processing room somewhere, deciding how much of his pride was worth the legal bill. Gary Pruitt was probably already calling someone to come get his car, and she was standing in the diner she had worked in for 6 years, in a building she knew better than her own face, and something had shifted inside the morning that she could not name precisely, but could feel in the way you feel a change in pressure before weather arrives. "Yeah," she said. "I think I actually am." Lou nodded. He went back to the kitchen. She turned from the window. She picked up the coffee pot. She straightened her apron. She looked at the diner, the tables and the stools and the clock and the reach-in cooler that made its sick cat sound, all of it exactly what it had always been, and somehow this morning entirely different. There are days that simply pass, and there are days that draw a line through your life and mark the place where you stopped being one version of yourself and started being the next. Emily James had worked enough double shifts to know the difference, and she knew, standing there with the coffee pot warm in her hand and the October light coming through the windows and Dale's words still sitting in her chest like something solid and true, exactly which kind of day this was. She walked to the counter. She filled Dale's cup, even though Dale was gone, because the motion of it was right. And then she filled her own, and she stood there in the diner she had given 6 years of her life to. In the town she had never quite managed to leave, and she understood something. She had needed the whole morning to arrive at that dignity is not given to you by the people who respect it. It lives in you before they see it. It was there on the floor. It was there when she got up. It was there when she smiled at the paramedic and gave her statement to Grant and poured coffee for Dale and took the mop from Lou's hands before Lou took it from hers. It had always been there. She had simply needed one Tuesday morning in October, and a Navy SEAL named Carter Dean, and a German Shepherd named Father of Peace, to remind her that it was never going to leave.